What is some secret technology hidden from the public? Story 1. I'm pretty sure cell phones have had the capability of being used as bug microphones to transmit your conversations to the agencies, even when the phone is powered off. There were rumors that even cell phones in the 90s had this ability. The new DVR and cable boxes with the voice-activated remotes likely listen a lot too. Talk about something like buying particular groceries or replacing an appliance, and guess what very specific ads suddenly show up in the sidebar? And that's with not doing any previous browsing for those things. You just mention them, and they show up. So ISPs and telecommunications are likely on some level at the bigger ad networks. Story 2. As the conspiracy theory rabbit hole goes, there is a theory that we have obtained a lot of technology from reverse engineering alien equipment. As this theory goes, if it is not a win-win-win, the technology is suppressed. What I mean by that is, it has to be implemented and profitable, without disrupting current business structures and institutions. The most interesting by far is a device that can scan you, diagnose any illness or disease, and treat it. They say the medical industry was so against it because it would ruin their business that it has been permanently banned, so to speak. I never thought too much about it being a crazy theory, but after watching what these guys have done to maintain control over the last several years, it wouldn't surprise me if it did exist. The medical industrial complex isn't really there to help us. They are there to maintain the status quo. They have done everything in their power to keep it a business in the US. They have done everything in their power to make self-treatment illegal, from attempting to ban CBD oil and kratom. The mysterious deaths of rivals in Canada, the list goes on and on. Story 3, GPS jamming. Not exactly that we're not sure whether or not the technology exists, but rather that it's been used or not. The Navy claims to have never used it, and they claim they'll give prior notice before doing so. But during the Gulf War, many ships around the Persian Gulf reported errors with their GPS way above normal tolerances. Of course it exists. GPS is nothing more than a signal beamed from satellites orbiting the Earth. The GPS receiver then does the calculations based on the signal strengths from each satellite. You can jam and intercept any signal, really. Yeah, that's a pretty grounded take. It's not a question of if GPS jamming is possible, it absolutely is. Like you said, GPS relies on relatively weak signals from satellites, and those can definitely be jammed, spoofed, or otherwise disrupted. It's basic physics and radio tech. What's really striking and kind of unsettling is the way official channels sometimes dance around the issue. The Navy's saying they've never used it and that they'll give prior notice sounds nice in theory, but in practice? During a conflict like the Gulf War, where information is tightly controlled and tactics evolve in real time, those kinds of assurances start to feel more like PR than policy. Story 4. In 1992, I went to a 3-day political convention in Philly. One of the talks was by a former CIA agent who said that everything we are told is a new or cutting-edge discovery the government has already had for 5 years. They keep us behind so they will always have the upper hand. The military does research in things that are years away, and some of the technology is enormously expensive or requires huge infrastructure to build. But they're not 50 years ahead of the consumer world in anything. They just have different requirements. If you needed a stealth fly-by-wire unmanned stealth aircraft ASAP, you could probably get one fairly quickly, but you don't, so haven't. In that sense, the military has had nuclear weapons for 67 years and you don't. But the first nuclear power station was only 9 years after the first nuclear bomb. And it was by the guys who didn't develop the bomb. I would be careful not to confuse research with deployed equipment. Within about 2 to 5 years of the military using anything someone else can copy it half decently, if they are so inclined. Things in labs can be cool, but there's a huge gap between a lab project and a few thousands of people using something. Story 5. None chassas. They are all out in the open. They are just underreported. If you want to know about the stuff that is out there in mass production, just go back 5 to 10 years and read the research journals. Why? Because every academician wants to publish and profit. Way before something becomes the latest mass tech, it's batted around in the journals. Anecdotal illustration, not proof. Way back in 2001, Microsoft was sending their research team to lecture at MIT about Palladium, trusted computing, and multi-core processors. The audience was generally respectful but equipped to debate. Some of the audience, a gentleman from GNU, was openly hostile, dismissive, and prescient. Now, why did MS choose to vet their idea to a known hostile? Because the philosophical opposition was accompanied by technical ridicule that they would not receive from another audience. It improved the tech. Now, the hilarious thing is, those lectures predicted that it would take 10 years for mass adoption of trusted computing platforms and multi-core processors, and that it would require a form factor change to move away from the relationship users have with their existing software. Of course, their marketing department tried to hype it as the greatest thing ever that was going to happen real soon now, but the engineers saw no reason to BS the audience. Here we are, a bit more than 10 years on, and every one of their predictions has come true. The fundamentals of trusted computing are in every smartphone, video game system, and consumer computer you purchase. Grab a few technical journals today, a bottle of whiskey, and read about your future. Story 6. Unbreakable encryption. Either the NSA has a backdoor to RSA, or we are severely underestimating the cracking capabilities of the NSA mainframes. They are probably using either huge NVIDIA arrays with 2-day processing or Cell PowerPC-based tech. You can't break any modern encryption scheme with brute force. The key space is just too big, no matter how big and how fast the computer is. Even if you made all the silicon in the universe into a special purpose computer and clocked it at 10 gigahertz, it would still take more time than the current age of the universe to break a 8,192-bit RSA key by brute force. If you want to break current encryption schemes, then you have to attack the algorithm itself to reduce the key space into something manageable, and I'm pretty sure the NSA is doing exactly that. Story 7. I don't think we have it just yet, but we might be much closer to an interstellar propulsion system than most people think. I'm sure you all remember this article from a while back. NASA doesn't seem like the group to go throwing wild speculation around. They wouldn't even release Curiosity results until they were 100% sure of what they had. The press release talks about how the recent announcement stunned the physics community, but in reality, this model was proposed over a year ago. They even publicly released the review article on the Alcubierre drive last year, in which they were already planning the proof of concept tests that would allow them to start scaling it up, just like how the first nuclear reactor was built. In my opinion, this research is probably already moving from theoretical to practical, and possibly to application within a decade or two. Of course, we've been demonstrating fusion power works for years too, and have yet to produce something commercially viable. But this would be one secret technology I'd be pretty damn excited about. Story 8. Cures for various diseases which are extremely lucrative for big pharma to help treat with expensive drugs rather than eliminate. Keep in mind that when a new drug is discovered, it goes through decades of testing. Whatever new treatments we have now were discovered in the 80s and 90s. There probably are cures for cancer and AIDS right now, but they are going through the enormous testing process before they are released to the public on a large scale. For example, just recently, there was a drug in the final stages of testing, which could successfully treat Parkinson's disease. Not just like an L-DOPA treatment, but it would have serious positive effects: decrease in neuronal proteinaceous aggregates, the onset of neuroregeneration, and decrease of memory loss and discoordination. In the last stages of testing, though it worked in C. elegans, mice, pigs, and chimps, it didn't work in human trials and was discontinued. Story 9. A gun turret based on facial recognition, possibly created by someone planning for zombie eradication. Something as simple as a gun on an automated turret, linked up to a camera with facial recognition. The gun turret would lock onto the position based on facial recognition, fire, then wait 1 to 5 seconds before firing another round, having a fluctuation in time between shots based on how many faces are registered. It just seems too easy to make in the vast spectrum of military technology capabilities to not attempt to implement, considering people at home make similar turrets using Nerf and airsoft guns. That hits a really unsettling intersection between terrifyingly plausible and already halfway here. You're right. It's absolutely not far-fetched. The core technology is widely available. Facial recognition algorithms, image processing, open-source targeting software, and even motorized turrets are already being used by hobbyists. The only real difference between a homemade airsoft turret and a military-grade version is lethality, funding, and intent. And when you start adding in AI, predictive targeting, and adaptive behavior based on how many faces are in view, yeah, now we're in the territory of autonomous weapons, and that's where things get ethically murky fast. Story 10. I somehow knew a while ago that viable solar energy technology, cheap and efficient, is already developed, but governments realize that the introduction would destroy the currently fragile economy and therefore decide to hide it from the public. Instead, they introduce a couple of non-practical options, either expensive or only effective in certain regions, and make the public believe we don't have the technology yet. I know this sounds like a conspiracy, but it's the same reason the Russians hide an enormous diamond minefield because it would make diamonds' price drop vastly. Story 11. There are so many possibilities. We need smart speed advisories for one. Follow the speed advisory and significantly reduce the red lights and traffic jams you sit in. It could reduce traffic waves and allow jams from major accidents to dissipate much faster. There's also some interesting possibilities if we network traffic controls and allow road users to upload their routes. You could drive at the advised speed to arrive at the traffic control within a green light window, which has been generated to be optimal for everyone. The system could cluster vehicles together on the freeway that are all going to the same exit so you can all hit the same green at the exit intersection. Drive in the third lane at 68 miles per hour until you see the green Prius in 8 minutes. Then, with automatic braking systems coming out, we could make tailgating okay in these clusters. You could give permissions for the car behind you to follow closely if it has an approved system, and this would reduce the following tolerances on the automatic braking system for that car. So you could draft safely all the way to your exit and save gas. There could even be separate groups for speed and efficiency. If you want efficiency, you get hooked up with a big truck to draft all the way. For speed, a cluster of cars that's going to go 80 the whole way along a route optimized for higher speed. Of course, in this future, we'll have different tiers of driving licenses which enable higher speeds. Story 12. The knowledge of genetically modifying humans. They don't want us to have cat girls. This is surprisingly true. Not the cats. But the US government won't fund any project that aims to mix human DNA with animals. Even though things like growing human organs in pigs would be a lifesaver, it's not quite that easy, of course. But they have had success in producing human blood in chimps. But they didn't have to go such a long way with that. Story 13. In 1985, CNN did a special report on radio frequency weapons. They hired an engineer who built an RF mind interference machine based on Soviet schematics. The machine successfully transmitted images into a CNN reporter's mind. The stunned engineer said that given 3 weeks' time, he could scale up the machine to use on a whole town, causing them to do things against their better judgment, see and hear things that weren't there, etc. The Pentagon said it was too sensitive a subject to comment on. Remember, these effects were achieved by civilians over 30 years ago. One can speculate that they've made great advances in the past decades. Story 14. Battery technology that doesn't suck. Does anyone else find it weird that any patent or invention that could potentially threaten national security is hidden away by the federal government? Look up the Invention Secrecy Act. In 1991, there were over 5,000 inventions kept under wraps because any government agency, including NASA, can deem them potentially harmful to national security. This includes battery and energy technologies. Yeah, it is weird and more than a little frustrating. Battery technology in particular feels like one of those areas where progress should be much further along by now. We've had electric vehicles for over a century. We've had lithium-ion batteries since the 90s. And yet, here we are, still limping along with marginal improvements year over year while consumer demand and climate urgency keep growing. Story 15. Optical cloaking using metamaterials. Metamaterials are materials that have both negative permittivity and permeability and thus have a negative index of refraction. Because of this, light doesn't bend the usual way when it hits the surface. The most exciting application of this, in my opinion, is the ability to smoothly guide light around an object and set it back on its original path, so it's as if the object weren't there to the observer. There has been a little documentation on it in the scientific community, but I suspect it is in full-blown development under military funding. So far, according to the scientific community, visible wavelength cloaking has not been achieved. It has, I'm sure of it. Story 16: Ocean Current Energy and Tidal Turbines. Ever seen the experiment where a hamster running in a wheel generates enough power to turn on a light bulb? Now imagine the constantly and naturally moving ocean currents are the hamster. When you think of it that way, it's as simple as the steam engine, and no doubt something we could have been producing for 100 years. Drop one on the seabed off the coast of any major city, and you generate low-cost, clean, renewable energy using a device that shouldn't require much maintenance. Big Oil would plot if any country started building one of these. Story 17. Honestly, cure for certain degenerative diseases, especially cancer. Maintenance is more profitable than an absolute cure. Sure, it may be initially profitable for the company that releases it first, but it would be prohibitively expensive for the vast majority of the population, so only a small percentage would be using it. And then, when it finally becomes cost-friendly on a larger scale after patents expire, and/or rival pharma companies clone or make a similarly effective product, and/or the public outcry from the 99% due to only the 1%ers having access to a life-saving drug forces the government to make it more widely available and cheaper happens, then what? You have a bunch of people cured from cancer who don't need long-term care. This would have sweeping ramifications across the medical or hospital industry beyond big pharma. Going deeper into the conspiracy, you could say governments don't want it either, as it would lead to citizens living far longer on average, creating a burden on the social security or welfare or economy, thus incentivizing a government to not release it. Story 18. I think the directed energy, free electron laser weapon programs are further along than the military will admit to. No, these are not handheld weapons. Those likely never will exist, because it just makes no sense given that a bullet is just as deadly against targets small arms would be used against. However, ship-based FELs are an absolute necessity if the US ever wishes to stay the dominant naval power, as China's hyper-velocity carrier killer missiles move far too fast for any conceivable conventional point defense system. Story 19. Just a random thought, but the F-14 fighter was only retired a few years ago, and I believe it is still a decent combat aircraft. While it, and especially its weapons, have been steadily upgraded, that plane's basic technology was invented in the 60s. As much as we like to think that we know about the cutting-edge weaponry that the US military is working on, I think that if a real war came, the US would be deploying secret weapons that for all intents and purposes would be magic to an enemy. I think that the US is a lot farther ahead with weapon systems than anyone knows. I think that if a real war came, the US would be deploying secret weapons that for all intents and purposes would be magic to an enemy. Actually, the Vietnam War is a good and cautionary example of that. The US could pull out secret weapons that were centuries ahead of their adversaries in some ways. Near illiterate guerrillas wearing sandals were going up against supersonic bombers with infrared night vision, sensors buried in the ground that could track their footsteps, exotic chemicals sprayed from the air to kill the jungle so they couldn't hide, etc. Guys in the sandals still won though. Story 20. Advanced nuclear power, much smaller and much more portable than is currently commercially available for public power. Our aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines can run for an obscenely long period of time using miniature nuclear reactors on technology that I'm guessing is over 20 or 30 years old. Our cutting-edge power generation, while maybe not quite stable or field-ready, is probably much better than anything we know about right now. This definitely exists. I remember seeing a documentary about some giant underground bunker being made somewhere. Antarctica, I believe. And one of the last steps was a plug-in nuclear power generator that was really quite small. I'll never remember or be able to dig up this video myself, Maybe somebody else here has seen it and can cough up the source. It was in Greenland. It was called Camp Century, aka Project Iceworm. On the surface, it was supposed to be to test Arctic construction techniques, perform scientific observations, and see if a mobile reactor could work. The secret part was it was also supposed to be a huge launch site for nuclear missiles, defending against a first strike from Russia. However, the project was scrapped when they figured out that the glacier moved much faster than they believed, making the project unsustainable. Story 21. Proper real-time integration of all forms of surveillance. Satellites, drones, manned recon flights, robotic cloaked regular binoculars. It's ridiculous to put a single person behind each form of camera and expect them to carry up the chain, the information where it meets another person sitting behind a camera. It would be much more effective to build a system that can easily integrate all of it in real time and present it in a useful way to make decisions. Whether it's virtual reality, ocular spelling, Rift displays, or just a great map display with a tricked-out game controller, or sky-high predator vision. It's not impossible to develop, just expensive, which means the government made at least two of them. It may be used in only specific scenarios and have limitations, but each commander in the battlefield should never truly have to wonder what is beyond the ridge or behind the building, and at least know if it's radioactive, biologically unusual, or just plain creepy. I could imagine outside the US it may not be available everywhere, but inside the US, you and the corner you've been standing on have been watched for weeks, and calling it up is only a few keystrokes away. Story 22. They probably don't have anything of importance, but then again, they could. I mean, it's completely possible. I'm not sure what sort of special machinery they'd have, though. Possibly some kind of futuristic weapon we've never heard of. That's somewhat of a scary thought. Watch the news. Maybe they'll announce something soon. I guess that wouldn't make sense, though. I imagine they'd want to keep these kinds of things a secret, but why would they? We could most likely do amazing things with the kinds of technology our government might be hiding. You will definitely want to keep an eye out and do research on these things. You might find something interesting. There has to be some incredible things that no one even knows about. But once again, there could be nothing. The government could be just as primitive as we are. It's all possible. Crap. They might not have anything in storage. We may never see any of the things we've imagined are already in existence. It's weird to think what would be worse, the government having advanced technology or them not having it. I suppose it wouldn't matter much either way. It's all good. We may never know. Story 23. I think that in today's world, it is a lot harder to keep technology secret. You might be able to keep parts like a better radar absorbent paint secret, but complex things that would take hundreds or thousands of people with many contractors and subcontractors involved would be hard to keep secret. They couldn't even keep the NSA shenanigans secret, and that wasn't even about new technology, but about using existing technology in unethical ways. Anything that takes more than a few dozen researchers and engineers to develop is probably too hard to keep secret. Story 24. Suborbital and orbital planes. Not like a spaceship one, but suborbital and orbital bombers and recon planes that take off from an airfield into space and return. People have been speculating about them for almost 30 years since Project Aurora had been rumored as a replacement for the SR-71 Blackbird. Combined with advances like Sabre engine, whose concept has been around since 1955, I honestly think we may have the ability to reach space without large rockets, but the advantage of this is too important to the military, not to mention in violation of a few treaties, to admit the US and its allies have it. Yeah, this one hits that sweet spot between science fiction, Cold War legacy, and plausible black budget reality. The idea of suborbital and orbital bombers or recon planes, basically craft that can take off like a jet, reach space, and come back without needing a launch pad, has been floating around since at least the 80s. And the rumors around Project Aurora, that's practically modern mythology in aerospace circles. Sonic booms over the desert, strange contrails, hypersonic flyovers that radar can't keep up with. It's all there, just without any official confirmation. Story 25. Edward Snowden whistle blew on Prism long before the advent of AI as we currently know it, and before Home Assistants were released as we know them. To not believe that the government, which still actively even admits to using PRISM and is instead hunting Snowden, is combining PRISM, AI, and these surveillance technologies would be extremely naive. They almost certainly have progressed this and are likely helping develop quantum computers to make these tools more effective. I am also just thinking of advanced softwares in general that could help them with hacking or coding. I mean, considering teens have hacked the FBI, I don't necessarily think that it's a strong argument, but surely they have the best software possible to protect themselves overseas.